welcome back to another Dark Space Studio video. In today's video, we're going to be coloring my cover for Luke Bloody Tooth issue 1. As you can see here, we're just going to get into the video, and I'm already working on the flats here. Flats are a very crucial part to coloring comics today. It basically separates all the different elements within your artwork. So the hair, the jeans, the shirts, all these things just need to be a different color. I am not a professional flatter by any means, so I just use whatever colors, I'm sitting around with. Nothing very specific right now. Professional flatters will go in there and typically do, flesh tone colors for skin, stuff like that. Because I'm doing it myself, I just want to get it done. I just try to do it as quick as possible. I think for this phase, it took me, an hour, maybe a little bit longer to get everything done and colored in. So now that the flats are done, you can see I have my base colors of what will eventually be the colors for this piece. With her jeans, I started with like a mid-tone blue. I'm working in the highlights and some of the shadows. During this part of coloring, what I tend to focus on is just getting very natural lighting shapes built. The shapes of her abs, her jeans, trying to make things look round or give them some sort of natural depth. I don't really overthink this process too much. Since I did the artwork, I know, there's gonna be spots where I'm gonna want shadows and I'm gonna want highlights. So I try to make sure I do that. Here I'm just separating some things, grabbing some things I didn't get in my initial flats when I did this. It's important for me to have a lot of different elements separated. So his collar, I wanted to separate that from the jacket, right? So it's a little bit easier for me to grab it, magic wand it, and get it colored without having to go in there each time and lasso it out. I tend to overflat things where I will separate more pieces than maybe necessary, but it's just more of a personal preference for me. It takes a couple seconds to grab something and fill it with a color versus having to lasso it out 5 or 10 times depending on whatever that part is. Again, we're just looking at these natural highlights and shadows. I'm not doing a lot of shadow work right now. It's typically, just filling in a lot of the highlights. And then because I use like a neutral or slightly darker tone color, it does give you some sort of natural shadow, but I will go in there and touch up the shadows on a separate layer. As you can see, I'm working on her hair now, and again, just trying to make it look a little bit more natural. This is all very natural lighting type of stuff. I will go in later and I have a highlights layer and then a shadows layer. So I'll go ahead and if need be, not every piece I color, I use those layers. I sometimes don't use layers depending on what is going on in the piece of art. But for this piece, I did actually use a highlights layer and a shadows layer. And I kind of mixed and matched a little bit with the cut and gradient style to achieve those highlights and shadows. The one thing I do when I color, I only have a few brushes that are my go-tos, as I'm sure a lot of artists kind of have that same thing. I have one that's more painterly style that I found years ago and I really, really like. This one, I will tend to use a airbrush. Sometimes on faces for women, like skin tones, I'll use an airbrush for women to make it a little bit more softer. For men, I'll go back and forth. I'm checking my grayscales, which is an important factor, to make sure that things stay separated as far as you're not getting all the same values in color. And I won't dive too deep in, the values of color and all that, but it's just something that I try to remember to do, to look at a piece to say, are the different planes of the artwork, are they separated enough in value? Are the brights, bright enough? Are the darks not too dark to cover up the line art? We're just working on her skin here and continuing to just kind of flesh it out, no pun intended. And now just literally this process will take me anywhere from, I'd say an hour, maybe 2, depending on how many different elements I have. But this is literally laying all the base shadows and highlights for what will eventually be the shadows and highlights. And I'll refine those shadows and highlights. I typically, like my artwork, when I do pencils, I'll do, 2 or 3 passes at the pencils. I do the same thing with colors. I threw in my background, which is, something relevant to the book a little bit, with it being like magic and witchcraft. I thought it would be cool to throw in some little sigils and symbols there. Now this is the technique I use for hair, where I actually do the highlight, but then I'll smudge it to make it look like light is reflecting off individual strands of hair. It's probably not the fastest way to do hair. I know a lot of people will just lasso out some hair and kind of call it a day. I like this effect. I think it's kind of cool, and it gives the hair a little bit more wispy, natural look to it. We're working on some color corrections and just getting some of the highlights and shadows just tweaked. It still looks very saturated right now, and that's something that I tend to oversaturate some things, and then I have to go back and look. And as a lot of artists have said, like, take time away from your work, whether it's a minute, 5 minutes, walk around the block or something, or just get away from the artwork, and you'll come back with fresh eyes. And that's sometimes what I have to do. Like, this piece is super saturated right now. I will come back and adjust that later. This is where I'm working that cut and gradient style. And, I'm not a huge fan as far as, it's not something that I color with. I love the style. I just have never gotten super comfortable and confident using it. I've done some work for other indie publishers, and they really like it. So I definitely have used it in the past. It's just getting more comfortable and more confident using that style. I also use layer masks quite a bit, and this helps to soften up a lot of these cut and gradients that I'm putting in here. Not everything has to be a super harsh line. It's finding that balance between a soft faded line versus an actual hard line. And now I'm, going in with the shadows. So this is something where I actually used both layers, my shadows and highlights layers. And I think it turned out really nice. I was just able to focus on the shapes of Rose here, the shape of her shirt, her abs, and then her jeans, and making sure that things look cylindrical. They have, the highlights are at the lit part, the most lit part of her leg, and then it kind of gets darker around the edges to give it that cylindrical shape. Since I did the artwork, I kind of, in my mind, I knew, like, okay, I want this to be shadowed, this to be a highlight. So I will go ahead, and the creases in his elbow here, like, I knew that I would be making that a shadow, and I rendered it so as if someone else were to color this, they would see, like, oh, that is a spot to fill in a shadow, whether you do like a cut and gradient or you just color it, however. But I wanted to make sure that, like, I left those pieces in as the artist. I rendered out those shadows and some of the highlights as well. That's something I just kind of picked up over the years. I think the image guys did it quite a bit. Like, I know they over rendered a ton, but I like that. It's one of those things it's fun to, for the artist to kind of go that extra step and render a bunch of stuff out. Here I'm just literally adjusting a lot of the shadows, the colors. There's a lot of color correction when it comes to coloring comics, at least for me. Kind of take it with a grain of salt, like my process. This is definitely a very individual thing, coloring comics or drawing in general. It's how you see things. It's how you want things to look. Maybe you want something that's super saturated. That's totally fine. So for me, I just try to have balance, and I want to use color as a way to separate the characters. I'm not necessarily going with complementary colors so much, but Luke has the brown, the tan jacket, the lighter colored shirt, and then Rose pops with that purple. So there's contrast there, and then I add the red from the main villain in Luke. I add that red as another way to add contrast and another color that separates her from everyone else. You know, and here we're actually going in and adding a lot of the highlights from Rose's Magic, which, you know, again, have my own set of brushes, and I just go in there and like fill in all the magic. You know, I'm going to add a bounce light on Rose's back here in a second, and then that also kind of just gives the piece a little bit more depth. So we're going to add in a little bit of glow, add in the light on Luke here, and we're going to kind of show you the final piece here in a little bit. Once the magic is all added in, make that, I think I made it green. Yeah, it was like a greenish color. And there's the final piece colored. And then we're gonna have the cover, the final cover. So added a little bit more to it, and hope you enjoyed it. And we hope to see you in the next video.